everyone. I'm Afri, and I spend a lot of time thinking about public testing infrastructure. And today I want to give an update on public zero testnet infrastructure, and specifically what has been changed very recently and what's going to change in the future potentially. So I don't know how deep I should go in this 20 minutes, but I want to touch base with everyone to explain what it actually means, what is a testnet, and why do we have testnets. And I want to quickly jump over the two existing testnets, Görli and Sepolia. I want to talk about issues on Görli and where they're coming from and how we can mitigate them. And in the end, I want to talk about the difference of testnets and what we can do going forward. Yeah, what's testnet? Does anyone not know what a testnet is? Okay, so if you're an engineer, you build something. You can be a software engineer, so you build software. You can be like another engineer. You can build like a bike or well. At some point, you need to find out if your work actually does what you intended to be, right? So we test it. In software engineering, you have different full catalog of different test suites, and we are working in a very specific field of computer engineering, where we work with centralized networks. So we have software that is equally distributed around across machines, and this creates a network of software. And to test this, we not only need to test this single instance of engineering on this single node or machine, but you also need to test how they work together, right? And this is what we call a testnet. There are so many different types of testnets. I will dive into using testnets and what they're used for later, but in general, there are two groups that use testnets, and that are the application developers that want to deploy something to your network, and then there are the protocol developers that basically build this network itself, right? In most cases, they use their own frameworks to simulate a network, to create shadow forks of existing networks, or even you have your own. I don't know if you ever deployed a smart contract or build a decentralized application, you probably just deploy it to like a local test environment. Today, however, I want to talk about public testnets, and public testnets is a massive testing infrastructure that's required to coordinate with other people also requiring to test their stack and maybe even integrate with your stack. Ethereum has two testnets currently. They are Görli and Sepolia. Who has not heard about Görli or Sepolia yet? Görli is not only a park in Berlin, but it's also a Ethereum testnet. There is this tradition to name Ethereum testnets by subway stations. So in this case, it's the Görlitzer Bahnhof in Kreuzberg, close to the full node or the Ethereum offices. But also close to the factory Görlitzer Park in Treptow, where the Görli testnet was ideated in 2018 by a team that wanted to solve a very specific problem. There were two different testnets before Görli, very specifically the Cobalt testnet, the Ring testnet, and they were running different technologies, so there was no way to test applications across these two networks, which was back in the day in 2018 an issue. But this is not what I want to talk about today, but This is basically just the background story of why Görli was ideated and created and in the end launched in 2019. Today it's the main Ethereum testnet. Actually gave a talk at DEF CON about post-merge testnets last year, and if you're a bit nerdy about testnets or the history of Ethereum, I gave a brief overview, so where I also dive into like the background, so I just references here and skip over that. Görli was in a very unique position initially. We just wanted to solve an issue that arose between Coban and Rigby, and we somewhat were successful addressing this. But what's interesting about the Görli launch is that it's completely coincided with the Beacon chain development cycle. The Beacon chain is a standalone blockchain that is today the consensus layer for Ethereum. After proof of stake, it's a proof of stake chain that, since the merge, is basically running the consensus for Ethereum. Before 2018, there was no such concept of having a standalone Beacon chain or consensus layer chain in addition to the former execution layer chain on Ethereum. So there were a lot of ideas of having hybrid proof of stake, proof of work blocks, proof of stake blocks, and so on. But what happened in 2018 is that there was actually a gathering in Berlin of Ethereum researchers, among them Vitalik, who proposed this concept of the Beacon chain. So when we ideated Görli as a testnet, we were not really aware that this new concept is going to arise and that this could actually create huge requirements on testnets. So actually we just decided, we just launched this testnet for application developers primarily, and launches with a total supply of what could possibly go wrong, 115 million, which was about the same of Ethereum mainnet. There was one team in 2018 that was very far ahead of time. That was the Prismatic Labs team who saw the need for having their own dedicated Ethereum testnet and also requiring a lot of tokens. So they were smart enough to reach out to us and to ask for a huge allocation so they could test their own Beacon chain implementation on Görli, and also build the entire Beacon chain testing stack on top of Görli. This, however, created a huge demand for Görli Ether. And as I said, there were only 115 million Görli Ether, and most of them, after years and years of testing Beacon chains, are locked up in deposit contracts. There are some instances where we created deposit contracts that were withdrawable, so you could withdraw the tested Ether again after some testing, but most of the deposit contracts didn't have this feature. So a lot of this initial supply of only 150 million Görli Ether are not really available anymore because they are locked in this smart contract. So if you don't know how the Beacon chain works, this deposit contract is a smart contract on the execution layer that works just like bridge to the consensus layer. So if you deposit it into this contract, the Beacon chain reads these deposits and at some point activates or allows reactivating the validator on the Beacon chain. So as I said, there was no way to unlock these tokens, so we were in a downward spiral of supply, and what was I going to say? There was no way to unlock these tokens, but there was also no way to increase the supply easily. So if you would increase the supply, you would need, even though it's just a testnet, you would need consensus across clients and teams. And there was always this notion between client teams or client developers, they say, there is actually so much development and testing and maintenance costs associated with having a specific protocol upgrade that only targets a testnet that there is actually no easy way or no cheap way to increase the supply. So this seemingly tiny problem of total supply caused that we had a public testnet that is heavily used. Today it's a mainstream testnet, but it's so hard to get this testnet tokens, because if you want to deploy something, you need these tokens, right? And then after proof of stake, you also compete with people that want to stake. The big staking pools that need a lot of Ether to test their staking pool software, and all these professional stakers that want to test validators or validator orchestration. They are all on Görli, and they are all fighting for this 100 million Görli ETH. And the Görli ETH supply is mostly distributed at this point. And what happened is, a couple of years ago, some people on Twitter thought, oh, what about having an incentivized testnet? And suddenly people with big bags lurking on Twitter decided, oh, let's just pay people to buy up Görli or ODC, which created a massive problem, because you want these testnets to be free. So because if you want to test something before you deploy it on the mainnet, you don't want to pay before, because there can be so many things that go wrong, right? So it should be always free. This is like kind of non-negotiable here. This accumulated into the launch of the testnet to mainnet bridge, unfortunately, a couple of weeks ago, and now there is a lot of speculation around Görli's on decentralized exchanges. Before I address this, I want to briefly take a look at the Sepolia testnet. Sepolia is a testnet that was silently launched by the guest team in 2021. That was, interestingly, a proof of work testnet. I was really happy that I could dedust my miner and mine some testnet coins, because that's what I like doing. And the idea was initially to have a new testnet. I actually don't know. Does anyone know why we launched Sepolia? They wanted to have a new testnet, fresh testnet, another testnet. Maybe the merge was probably one of the most dedicated software upgrades in recent history, at least I witnessed. So they maybe just wanted to have an additional testnet. So Sepolia was launched, and there was this. Now, how do we look at it? So Görli was fairly big. It was fairly big in usage. So we had a lot of applications deployed to it already. It had also a huge validator set, like a couple of 100,000 of validators. And instead of launching another proof of stake testnet, the community said, but wait, we also need a more stable testnet for application developers. And more stable in this case means less prone to, I don't know, finality issues, downtime, whatever you come up with. If you want to test your application on a public testnet, you don't want to stall. You always want to be sure that your transactions get confirmed, because otherwise your entire development lifecycle will be super annoying. So there was this idea to actually move this proof of work testnet to a proof of authority version of the beacon chain. So today, Sepolia is a public testnet with a permission validator set. What this means, I will explain in a bit. And also what's good about it, because we were seeing the issues on Görli with regard to the supply of testnet tokens. We created Sepolia in a way that it allows us to have a near infinite supply. So let's just briefly have a look at the difference. So Görli was launched as a click proof of authority network. So it had a proof of authority means basically there are just a handful of validators that are allowed to seal blocks. This is a fairly permissioned consensus, and this has the sole purpose of giving you the stability guarantee of this network will just run. You don't have to care about miners, validators, or whatnot. It will just seal the block every 15 seconds, and you as a tester, you just deploy your application. Magically works, right? Interestingly, by merging it with a broader beacon chain, it became proof of stake. And proof of stake by nature is somewhat permissionless as long as you have access to tokens. And but as I said, we have the supply issues. There's this unfortunate scarcity of tokens. And now, interestingly, if we look at Sepolia, that was proof of work, which is proof of work by nature is permissionless. Satoshi Nakamoto consensus, one CPU, one vote, and theory. And since we use the modified beacon chain contract, it's actually permissioned. So technically, we moved this Sepolia network now to the permissioned network. It has near infinite supply through like this modified deposit contract, and this should be the network application should use going forward, because it basically addresses all the issues, at least for application developers. To check what the next slide is. Exactly. So that raises the question: why do we have more than one testnet, right? Why not just shut down Görli and move on to Sepolia? So this comes back to the point I initially mentioned. There are different target audiences that require testing, or this complex testing environment. Obviously, the core developers that build the clients that implement the Ethereum protocol or Ethereum protocols, they need a more complex environment to test their stack, specifically catching edge cases and also making sure that this not only works on paper but also in reality. The second big group using testnets is application developers, obviously, deploying smart contracts, decentralized applications, yes, recently added to this mix, we have actually the stakers to test their validator management. We have the big staking pools that have also fairly complex systems in production now. And these groups have different requirements towards the testnet. Obviously, you cannot test your staking setup on a permissioned network because you don't have access to consensus. That's the entire point of the word permission. Whereas you as an application developer, you don't care about consensus as long as it validates your transactions. So having a proof of stake or a permissionless network mainly caters protocol engineers and the stakers. Having a more stable permissioned network is more targeted as application developers. There is, in addition for stakers, because of the supply issue, or like especially testing larger setups of validators in production is such a big topic that there are also now parallel initiatives to have more ephemeral testnets. Mario Havel is working on it. If you're interested to dig into staking testnets, this is a recommendation for the testnet. So, what's happening going forward? What I did not touch on in this talk yet is what happened before 2023. So, we used to have a couple of testnets: Robston, Greenby, Golden. And all these testnets were heavily used by different applications, and a lot of application stacks were distributed across different testnets because not everyone was on the same testnet. And just last year, we duplicated at least 2 or 3 testnets, and that created a huge effort in both in the application layer, but also all the infrastructure that requires stable testnets, such as layer 2s. They all depend on a fairly stable testnet stack. And all of them, with the announcement of the duplication of Greenby, for example, or Robston, they started all moving to Görli. And I don't know who's to blame, but in a decentralized community, there is no one who's centrally communicating, no, don't use Görli, use Sepolia. But this is what should have happened in last year. So what's happening now is that all these layer 2s, all these applications, they migrated their stack. I don't know if you have ever used Uniswap, they are all on Görli now. And now we are telling them, okay, we have issues with Görli, so we shut it down. They are kind of annoyed, to put it mildly, about the situation where you actually don't know how long this infrastructure is available for you, right? And the problem here is that these systems, no matter is it some kind of decentralized exchange, is it a layer 2 stack? These stacks are so complex today that it takes these teams actually a couple of months to completely conduct such a migration from one test to another. So they are at the stage to say, whatever, just give us a testnet that has an infinite runtime. And this is their point of view. And on the other end, you have like protocol engineers or client teams that say, it's just a testnet that if we decide to reset it every month, you shouldn't care about it, right? So there are like kind of two ends of the spectrum, and I had this idea to arrange a meeting in the middle and make a proposal, and I call it the predictable Ethereum testnet lifecycle. So we always have one permissioned and one permissionless public testnet in parallel with a predicted or predictable or like scheduled launch date and a fairly predictable life cycle of 4 years of lifetime, plus additionally adding maybe 1 year of duplication notice or long-term support if necessary. And then you always have to launch a new replacement testnet every 4 years, so that everyone knows this testnet has this exact lifespan or this expected lifespan, and if I have to choose to migrate now or next year or in 2 years, I always know which testnet to use. And this will allow apps and infrastructure to prepare, and this is how it looks like. This is the entire history of Ethereum on one slide, specifically the testnet history. We are here in the middle. You can see that we are going through this phase where Rob Robson died already. Winkby is almost dead. I think it's like it will be shut down next quarter. If I'm not mistaken, it's no longer receiving protocol upgrades, so most of the applications are no longer on Winkby. Görli is already deprecated, so it has this deprecated notice, but it's not potentially not surviving the year. And what the predictable Ethereum testnet life cycle could look like, I have specified this in the Ethereum Magicians Forum. What this could look like is here, just starting with Sepolia, counting 4 years in the future or 5 years in the future and define the end date. And then looking at Görli, that is going to be shut down this year. We need to come up with a replacement testnet. Ideally, we launch it before Görli launches so that we have some overlap. In this case, we picked up a proposal by the Prague community last year that wanted to launch a Holešky testnet. There was some back and forth with the naming, and there was this Czech proposal to just abbreviate it to Holešky. And this is the next testnet to be launched for Ethereum to replace Görli. Okay, this is actually a slide from my DevCon talk. It's basically the too long didn't listen version of my talk. If you have to pick a testnet right now, you can run your validators on Görli. You cannot run them on Sepolia. If you want to deploy an application, please go to Sepolia, because Görli has a very short remaining lifetime left, and also good luck getting Görli. With regard to validators, of course, we also need Görli for validators, but there are initiatives like eStaker, where you can just use the Discord bot to get a deposit, so you don't have to deal with this. As I said, Holešky is scheduled to replace Görli. Görli is already announced in long-term support. We shut down end of year, and yeah, the Holešky coordination happens on GitHub. If you working with a team that would require Genesis allocation of tokens, Genesis validators, or whatever your idea is for launching a more advanced testnet than the previous ones, or if you have ideas how to address the issues we have with previous testnets, please join the conversation on GitHub /eastclients/Holešky. And shameless plug, we are actually having an event in Berlin. How convenient, on launch day, September 15, which is also coincidentally the merge day here in Berlin. It's called Protocol Berg. It's a decentralized protocol and infrastructure conference. Please take a look at it. It's protocol.berlin. We plan to have a small side event that is addressing the testnet launch, if you are into testnets like I am. If not, take a look at the website, because there are also other interesting protocol and infrastructure topics. There's also an open call for participation, so if you want to talk about these topics, feel free. We have offered a stage. And now I'm accepting questions.
Thanks, Afri. So why is the supply such a big topic on the testnet?
So why is the supply a big topic on the testnet? Yeah, so if you don't plan your testnet to be the main Ethereum testnet, then you probably don't expect it to be used that much. It's a complete failure on our end to work when creating a Genesis, right? So you have only one chance to create a supply, and this is when you launch a testnet. Then either you create a Genesis that has enough tokens to be allocated during its lifetime, or you create a mechanism, as we have on Sepolia, where you can use a trick to increase supply or inflate supply, right? But for Görli, which was launched 4 years ago, there is no easy way, even though it sounds such a trivial problem, that there is no easy way to increase the supply. So the supply is an issue at this point when a developer who wants to deploy an application has no access to testnet tokens easily, because when this plays into this field of speculation where some investors thought, oh, this might be the next, I don't know, big thing after Ethereum, because they read the tweet on social media platform, and they basically pay people to write bots to drain faucets. So if a normal developer wants to have tokens, the faucet is empty or it's down because it's rate limited or whatnot, it was a really big problem for the last 2 years, and that's the reason.
Why do you need to deprecate testnets and make new ones instead of just upgrade them? Keep the same ones.
The question was, why do I need to deprecate them instead of upgrading? Or?
Yeah, like why do you need to shut them down and make new ones instead of just keep them forever? And make changes accordingly when you have to, besides...
yeah, so there are two answers to that. One is that if we don't deprecate it or discourage people to use it, then this pain we are having right now will just grow. And the other question was basically why we not upgraded is because client teams don't want to maintain a protocol upgrade specifically for a testnet case only, because the planning, specification and code might be cheap, but execution and testing and maintenance in long term will be very expensive because you always have specific code only for the testing. So client teams always say, just throw it away and start over. And I mean, that's a fair point.
Yeah, makes sense.
Hey, hi. Thanks for the explanations. Super good. How is your working group structured? You mentioned that you had to work with big project like Meetup. How do you go over what should be the next testnet? Like, how do you have consensus, let's say, with this testnet thing? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. You won't like the answer because it's pure chaos. It's a mix of Telegram, Discord, forum, GitHub. It is. Just quickly think about it. I mean, most of it starts in GitHub. It starts in GitHub discussions. It starts in just setting up specifications and proposals, going to core developer calls. In most cases, so in this case, I went to the all products call and was proposed to have a predictable life cycle to deprecate Görli to launch a replacement testnet. And then it goes on, then we have Discord discussions about what the name should be. Then there is a Telegram group of, layer 2s that coordinate on which testnet to use. And it is, I wouldn't even call it a group, it's more or less a very decentralized bunch of people that have a shared interest or like a mutual interest.
Thank you.
Hi. So you mentioned that there is a lot of speculation on the Görli testnet for the tokens. So my question is, what's the current price of the Görli token?
It's depending on the exchange rate. I think depending on liquidity, right? I could easily put it to 0. No, it's not so easy, but you can look it up. I think it's like 10 cents or 15.
Thanks.
You mentioned there should be 2 testnets, one permissionless, one permissioned, and the way I understood it, one would be more for the protocol testing, the other more for the app layer. So isn't it better than to launch more frequently so there's more overlap? Like right now you're ending one testnet and starting the other more or less at the same time. I would say if the life cycle is 4 years, but you're only interested in every second one of these testnets because you're an app developer, then maybe having a 2-year overlap that at every one stage you know which one to go for, which would mean predictably launching one every year, which means every second year you've got a new app testnet, and then they're overlapping, so you never have this, this one's ending, do we still test now, or lay off for 4 months and wait for the next one?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. There are a lot of nuances to this answer, but it breaks down to the price tag of maintaining this public infrastructure. And so first of all, you cannot easily duplicate, especially permissionless testnet. So like if people decide to run Görli forever, they can do it because there's
Is Robson still running?
you can make it work, right? I don't know, but I think in practice you are right, because I believe they will run longer than I proposed here, just for the sake of giving people more time. But for the sake of a proposal, you always have to balance the interests of different stakeholders in the ecosystem. And client developer or even someone like Infura who runs massive amounts of infrastructure or ecosystem, they will, at some point, they will look at you and say, why do you actually maintain 3 at the same time? I agree, there is a valid point, but you always have to balance interests, and I would say it's, I mean, yeah, we should look into this. It's a good point.
How is it financed, this infrastructure?
That's plain capitalism. It's basically just if you want your developers to use your services, you basically just support them all. Does that answer the question? Or other way around, if you say, "Oh, I'm a brewer, I'm too big," so I'm just making another brewer. I don't support this new setup. You will basically just lose money because developers go to other providers.
If the point of a testnet is to test an application, so core developers want to know if the testnet runs well, and app developers want to know if their app runs well, why separate it into two things and not keep it on the same thing? Because this is the closest we can get to the real world.
Yeah, I love this question. There are different expectations towards a testnet. The client developer wants a testnet that looks exactly as mainnet, with exactly no difference. Like not a single byte of code should differ, because this single byte of difference could make a huge difference when deploying or a program upgrade on a mainnet. That's why they always want to have something that looks exactly the same. Whereas an application developer, they care more about availability and stability. And the problem here is that if you have a permissionless network, people could just come in and break it on purpose, accidentally walk on. It's not very likely, but it happened in the past. And that's why we have these permission tests that have much better stability guarantees. But obviously, it does not prevent you from deploying your application on the other network. So this is happening right now in Görli. But yeah, that's why we should have both options open. Right. Also, if there are client developers in the audience or listening, they would always argue they actually don't want applications to be deployed on a permissioned network, but rather on this one where they are testing, because they want a lot of entropy on the network. They want a lot of applications. So that, as you see, there are a lot of different interests in how to approach this. All right. I guess that's it. Thank you from my end.
Thanks a lot.
Job already. Job.